Star Trek, Starfleet Academy, Crisis on Vulcan, Chapter 9. Night, thick and dark outside. The house is quiet with no hint that wakeful guards waited at strategic points beyond the walls and manned a security station inside. Spock, alone in his room, finished the last adjustment. "Computer," he said. "Working," responded a soft, disembodied voice. "I've integrated a Series 15,000 artificial intelligence module with your operating unit. It is an experimental design, but I believe it will augment your operation. Please test all functions." For the space of a heartbeat, the computer was silent. Then it reported, "All functions are normal." Spock leaned back. "Very well. I need to access the security visuals grid on the south side of Spaceport Prime. Take steps to conceal the link from anyone who might be monitoring the security system." The machine had no sense of legality or illegality, and it did not question the order. "Working. Visuals grid is available. The link is secure." "Give me a visual display beginning," Spock thought, and then gave a precise time estimate. That afternoon, when he and his father had passed the spaceport. "Working." The display flickered into existence. Spock studied the still picture. "Advance in standard seconds," he said. The display changed a series of still pictures. All were from one vantage point, and since they flicked into and out of existence at the rate of 1 per second, Spock saw a kind of jerky motion picture of the street with people hitching along. "Stop," he ordered after only 7 seconds. The air car that he and his father had used was visible, nosing into the picture from the right side. Spock scanned the crowd. "Advance in standard seconds, but hold each view for 5 seconds, he ordered. The air car moved to the center of the field, then off to the left edge of the picture. Next vantage point. The field of view shifted northward. Now the car was in the right corner again, but a different section of the street appeared. Stop. Overlay a coordinate grid. A yellow network of lines appeared over the picture. Spock isolated the figure he had seen. Enlarge sections Alpha 3 to Alpha 6, Beta 3 to Beta 6, Gamma 3 to Gamma 6. The squares enlarged to fill the whole screen. Delete grid. Spock leaned back. He was looking at Chaw, and Chaw seemed to be looking at him. In his hood and mask, he would pass for a young Tellarite male, but his eyes were unmistakable. "Computer," Spock said, "isolate this subject in your memory. Access security networks as necessary. Follow the movements of this subject and let me know where he is at this moment." "Working." "Display a map of his movements." A glowing map of the city appeared, with the route of Spock's target marked in a fluorescent green line. Chaw had reversed his direction a moment after spotting Spock and his father. He had taken a winding path across the city as if unfamiliar with its streets or as if trying to throw off any trackers. The line came to rest in a block of buildings equipped with special environmental controls for atmosphere and gravity, the domiciles of alien traders and visitors who liked some variation from the Vulcan conditions. Spock laced his fingers together and brooded. He could tell his father, or he could alert the security forces, or, taking a deep breath, Spock weighed the alternatives. What if Chaw were not a willing visitor to Vulcan? Could he be a hostage, perhaps, and disguised in an attempt to escape from the militant faction of Marathons? Or was he here as a spy? Or perhaps had he come to warn Spock? "Computer," Spock said. "Display the original picture of the target." And there was Chaw again, his eyes staring out of the Tellarite mask. "Computer, interpret the emotions of the target." "Unable to complete the task," the computer responded. "Do you need more data?" "Affirmative," said the artificial voice. "Please give a complete working definition of the term emotions." "Cancel the order." "Canceled." The night was well advanced. Spock had to make up his mind, and yet how could he? He knew what a marathon's emotions were like. He didn't. Spock only remembered that Chaw, like himself, had felt like an outcast. The young Vulcan lowered his head for a moment, then spoke with decision. "Computer, I give you this task. Currently, this house is under surveillance of an advanced security and detection system. Find a way for me to disable the system just long enough to get away from the house undetected. Working. Estimate of time required for the task. 3 hours, 39 minutes, 11.55 seconds. Standard. Wake me when you have completed the task. Affirmative. Utterly weary, Spock leaned back in his chair. He closed his eyes, cleared his mind, and in less than a minute he was asleep. Such relaxation called for the careful discipline of a Vulcan mind, or for the absolute exhaustion of a human one. Spock woke to the gentle jingling of a chime. The problem is solved, the computer said. Time elapsed, 3 hours, 37 minutes, 3.01 seconds. Standard. Less than your estimate. Very efficient. Yes, I will cause a minor malfunction that will engage the attention of the guard on the northwest side of the property. While he is attending to the problem, you may leave the environment at any time within the next 2 minutes, moving quietly. As soon as you are outside the detection field, I will reactivate the security system. The security monitors will be altered to give a false reading, indicating that you are safely asleep in your bed. Very good. Spock rose, instantly alert, and hurried outside, taking with him only a portable communicator. From the front, he could see the guard bent over a handheld readout device, trying to adjust the controls. On silent feet, Spock hastened away from the house, descending the flank of a bare, rocky hill. Dawn was approaching fast, and already the eastern sky showed a tinge of red. Spock hurried without quite running until he was 4 kilometers or so away from the house. Then, using his communicator, he summoned an air car from the Public Transportation Authority in the city. A few minutes later, the vehicle hummed into sight, flying on autopilot. It landed on a flat, sandy expanse, the floor of a long, dried lake, and Spock climbed into the pilot's seat, hoping he was not about to make the worst mistake of his life. By the time he reached the outskirts of the city, the sun was up, throwing long, sharp shadows over plain market squares and streets. Spock landed the air car on a public transportation pad, indicated on its control panel that he would not need the vehicle again, and walked several blocks. The low sun sent its rays hot and almost horizontal along the side streets. In between the intersections, the shadows were still crisp and dark. When Spock came to a halt, he stood in an archway that looked out toward the block of alien domiciles his computer had isolated. The morning chill was dissolving under the fierce rays of the sun. He hoped that Amanda and Sarek would decide to let their son sleep. He needed as much time as he could steal to carry out his plan. Spock settled into the shadows and waited. But not for very long. Within the hour, a stocky figure emerged, looked both ways, and then blended in with the early morning pedestrians. Spock followed the hooded, robed individual, gradually coming closer. When they cut through a section of the city given over to a green park, its walls breaking it up into maze-like squares, Spock hurried ahead, coming almost close enough to tap his quarry on the shoulder. "Cha!" he said loudly. The figure 6 steps ahead of him bolted and ran, cutting to the left and crossing a street. Spock ran after him. Vulcan heads turned sharply. Vulcan boys of Spock's age no longer played, and it was unseemly to run. Spock ignored them, his eyes locked on the hooded, cloaked figure ahead of him. A zig, a zag, and Spock's prey made a serious mistake, diving into a narrow alley between 2 blank-walled stone buildings. Spock reached a point where the alley bent at a right angle and saw that Cha was at a standstill, his back to the wall. "Cha," he said, "we must talk." The Tellarite vanished. Cha stripped off the hooded cloak, the lifelike prosthetic mask, and stood revealed as himself. "We have nothing to talk about, Vulcan." "On the contrary," Spock said, stepping forward, "I think that the 2 of us may be able to avoid—" Cha roared out, an inarticulate bellow, and dived forward, reaching for Spock. Fast as he was, Spock was too slow to react. Cha's strong arms gripped him, and the 2 fell to the ground, Cha raging as he tried to pin the Vulcan. He fumbled at his belt at a curved scabbard. Spock gripped the marathon boy's wrist, desperately trying to keep him from drawing his weapon. Spock was on his back. He bent his knees and got his feet into the pit of Chaw's stomach. Rolling, Spock kicked at the same time, flipping Chaw heels over head. The marathon landed on his back with a gasp, but immediately he scrambled up again. Spock crouched facing him. Chaw's eyes were wild, furious. "Chaw," Spock said, "I must ask you." No good. Chaw charged again, but this time Spock was ready. He seized Chaw's shoulder at the base of the neck, spread his fingers, and manipulated the nerve junctions that virtually all humanoid species had at those points. He felt Chaw stiffen, then collapse. Spock caught him, eased him to the ground. He looked behind him. No one was in the alley, and from here, they could not be seen from the street. He waited. After a few minutes, Chaw groaned. He sat up suddenly, reaching for his belt. "I have removed your weapon," Spock said. He held up the curved marathon dagger. Chaw backed away, sat with his spine against the blank stone wall. "Well, use it then," he growled. "Kill me." "I have no desire to do that. To injure you would be illogical." Amber-colored tears brimmed in Chaw's eyes. "You have humiliated me," he said in a gruff voice. "It will be a disgrace to my family if you do not kill me." "Killing is not the Vulcan way," Spock replied. "You can trust me." When Chaw did not respond, Spock gravely offered him the dagger, grip end first. Chaw darted a look of wild suspicion at the young Vulcan. "What kind of trick are you playing?" "No trick," Spock said. "I did not mean to humiliate you. Here is your weapon. I hope you will not use it." Chaw took it from Spock, stared at the curved blade, ran his finger over the marathon glyphs. Then he replaced the weapon in the scabbard. "Go." "Not yet," Spock insisted. "Chaw, permit me to say that the warfare in the marathon system has been illogical. Over the centuries, many thousands of your people have died in battle, and many millions have died indirectly from warfare. It is illogical for a species to destroy itself. Now the treaty has offered your people a way out of their hostility and hatred. Why is your clan and that of the rebels turned against it?" "I cannot speak of such things." Chaw's face wore a baffled expression. "You can't possibly understand. Some things are not permitted." "The same is true here," Spock pointed out. "By finding you, I have violated my father's wishes, yet I have the hope that finding you can produce a greater good." For a moment, Chaw seemed on the verge of some confession, but then he half turned and stared at the ground. "A marathon man may not speak of certain things," he muttered. "It is forbidden." Silence. From the hidden mouth of the alley, murmuring voices of small groups of people walked past, unaware of the two young men around the corner. The sky overhead was a sullen orange-red, the shadows in the alley deep and purple. Spock said slowly, "May I point out, Chaw, that neither of us is technically a man. Back on Marith, on the last night at Beltan, you told me the story of Valash and Hamarka. You said you were not yet of age, and so you could tell me that." "That is not true lore," Chaw maintained stubbornly. "The secrets of our belief, those I can never reveal to an outsider." "You are an outsider." Chaw flashed him an angry glare. "All of my clan are outsiders," he snapped. "Thrown off our world by those who disagreed with our beliefs, our customs. You don't know what it's like." Spock put a hand on Chaw's shoulder. "You're mistaken," he said simply. "I know very well what it is to be an outsider." Chaw wrenched his shoulder away as if Spock's touch were painful. "You can't." "But I do. The two of us, Chaw, do not belong, and yet we need to belong. I suggest that you could do your people more good than you know by sharing with me the secret cause of your clan's vendetta against my father." "Your father betrayed us!" Spock shook his head. "That would not be my father's way. You do not know him, but I do. Chaw, once on Marith you trusted me. Trust me again. If there is anything that my father can do to set things right, he will try. You have my word on it." For a moment, Chaw stared into Spock's eyes, uncertainty flickering in his expression. He licked his lips. "Spock," he said hoarsely, There's a homing device in my blade. I activated it when you returned it to me. For your own safety, leave now. No. You don't understand. My people are sworn to kill you. Then you will have to persuade them not to kill me. Chaw glanced anxiously toward the angle of the alley. I am not yet a man, he muttered. I have not yet undergone the ceremony of bonding. Perhaps, but it is true lore you asked me to speak of. I will never reveal it without your permission, Spock said. If I tell you, will you go? Spock nodded. Chaw leaned close and whispered. Spock tilted his head, listening as if he were a confessor listening to a repentant criminal's plea for forgiveness. A momentary expression of surprise flashed across his face and one of understanding. I see, he said at last. But Chaw, you have been misled. The one who must be behind this is not my father, but Chaw! A harsh voice whirled them both around. Karos Mars Santor, wearing no disguise apart from a brown hooded cloak, stood behind them. He raised a stubby weapon, a device like a silvery test tube, closed and rounded at both ends. No, father! Spock saw circles of energy leap from the end of the weapon, bluish expanding ripples in the air rushing toward him. He opened his mouth to speak, but the disruptor beam took him in the chest. Spock felt himself slammed backward. Everything happened too slowly, like actions in a nightmare. The toppling Spock stared straight up at the orange-red sky, then saw it darken and recede. He felt himself falling backward down into a dark, bottomless pit. He struggled to breathe, but his lungs would not work. Everything around him, colors, sounds, faded. Spock wondered when he would stop falling. He passed out before discovering if he ever would. Starfleet Academy, Crisis on Vulcan, Chapter 10. An eternity of drifting in a gray void, struggling against nothing. Is this death? Spock wondered, almost too empty to care. But something told him it was not. Something made him struggle like a swimmer far below the surface, desperately trying to rise again and gulp life-giving air. Then something, a blurry light place in the thick, dark fog, and a voice from somewhere far away, speaking his name. He tried to answer and found he could not. Tokath. The Vulcan term floated into his mind. It described a trance state. Badly injured Vulcans could enter Tokath, go dormant, allow their body's defenses to repair damage at peak efficiency. It was a learned skill, not an instinct, but Spock had learned it. Now he fought to break the trance, paying for his attempt with sudden wrenching pain. He groaned, and he must have made a sound, for the blurred face was back, hovering over him in the grayness. Spock! Father, croaked Spock. He forced his eyes to focus. Sarek, yes, and Amanda beside him, both leaning over Spock. The young Vulcan realized with a shock that he was at home, his own room. Oh, Spock, Amanda said, her eyes wild with worry. Sarek placed a hand on his shoulder. You were attacked by a Marathon, wielding a neural disruptor weapon, his father said. Fortunately, the security sensors picked up the discharge of energy, and the authorities captured the two assassins before they could fatally injure you. They... Codicil, groaned Spock. Sarek frowned. What? Father, you must add a codicil to the Marathon Treaty. Spock raised up in bed, gripping his father's arm with terrible urgency. Sarek, with a flash of distaste, pulled back, away from the emotional display. Spock spoke in a tumble of words. You were betrayed on Marith by Hull Menek Laswar. He was to tell you of the importance of certain ancient religious sites on the planet. He did not because he wished the Civil War to continue. He has dreams of conquering Marith from space, of restoring his clan to the leadership of the entire system. Calm yourself, Spock. Sarek's voice had a faint, displeased note, a stern tone that he almost never used. I do not understand what you are saying. Spock sat on the edge of his bed, his head spinning. He closed his eyes and forced himself to speak slowly, rationally. Father, the Marathons have strong, ancient religious taboos. On the planet, there is a high plateau called Pikban-Aldor. It is a shrine, the center of all Marathon religions. I have never heard that. Because of the religious taboos, insisted Spock. The Marathons may not mention their beliefs to outsiders, but their priests did delegate one man, Hol Minik Lasfer, to communicate their desires and demands to you. He did not. And so in the treaty you did not mention complete and free access to Pikban-Aldor for all Marathons. Sarek sank into a chair beside Spock's bed. I see. And his motive was to prolong the war. Spock nodded. He blamed you. The off-world colonists could not refuse to sign the treaty that they had negotiated, or they would lose face. But once away from the planet, Minik convinced the others that the planet-dwelling Marathons had bribed you to omit guarantees of religious tolerance. The opening of Pikban-Aldor for all believers was to have been the symbol for that tolerance. Sarek rose. I will question the captives, he said. Father. Spock's weak croak stopped Sarek in the doorway. Cha and his father, were they taken? They are captured, and the other members of their clan as well. None of them were seriously injured. Do not let them know where you learned this, said Spock. Otherwise Cha will become an outcast. Sarek nodded, and as he turned, Spock sank back on the bed. I am very tired, he said. He felt Amanda's hand, cool and soft on his forehead, and he drifted to sleep again. A time of healing and slowly returning strength followed. A dazed Spock woke only long enough to take a little nourishment, and then he sank back into the depths of Taukoth. The healing fever. Drifting dreams disturbed him. He saw himself on the Enterprise, grimly trying to avoid some kind of catastrophe, but failing because he could not move fast enough. He was on the grounds of the Vulcan Science Academy, witnessing an attack on Surak. But when he tried to run to his cousin's aid, the pathway turned to mud and made him stagger forward in nightmare sluggishness. He saw himself speaking to a group of students at the academy, with all of them murmuring, Not logical, you are not logical. But finally a day came when he opened his eyes, searched for the pain, and found it had vanished. He rose and dressed, and he met Amanda in the doorway. You are better, she said, and impulsively she embraced her son. How long has it been? He asked. She led him to her room, made him sit in a chair. You have been asleep, more or less, for a week. So much has happened. Sarek, I dreamed of him. Sarek is well. He has recovered, and he will be back at the Vulcan Science Academy within a month. Amanda shook her head as she studied her son's face. A neural disruptor set to kill is a terrible weapon, she said softly. It destroys major nerve junctions, and they cannot be restored. You were very close to death. I know. The security officer saved me. Amanda smiled. No, she said softly. Your friend saved you. Spock raised an eyebrow. I do not understand. Cha, said Amanda. He threw himself in front of the disruptor beam. His father dropped the weapon, certain that he'd killed his son. Marathons are even more susceptible to disruptor effects than Vulcans. Their neurons are not as well shielded as ours, Spock said. Amanda almost laughed. For whatever reason. When the security officers arrived, Karos Marsantor was holding his son's body. The nerves of his lower spine were badly hurt by the disruptor. He could not move his legs, and he was in pain. They took Cha to the House of Healing, and fortunately the damage was not permanent. He will walk with a limp for a long time, but he'll recover full use of his legs eventually. I see. The treaty? Sarek is planning to return to Marith in 6 weeks, as soon as Cha is well enough to travel. Santor's people, Mars people, Spock corrected. The Marathon family name comes second. Very well, Amanda said. Mars people have taken Hol Minik Lasfer into custody. They will try him according to their laws. Sarek believes that he can Negotiate a treaty that will allow all sides free access to some site on the planet that seems very important to them. I am sure he will succeed." "Aren't you happy for him, then?" asked Amanda. "Mother," Amanda chuckled, at least you show some emotion. I believe I shocked you that time." Spock considered. "I was not shocked. I was surprised at how illogical you can be." Days later, Spock stood beside Cha, who had walked a little for the first time since his father had tried to kill Spock. Cha, thinner, exhausted, sat in a hover chair in the solarium of the House of Healing. Through a huge curved window, he looked out across the city, toward the west. The dry landscape of Vulcan rolled away to the horizon. Hot afternoon sunlight poured in. "Your world is like Marith in some respects, but it is very different, too. Not as much water, different colors, a strange sky, and yet it has beauty of its own," Cha said. "I wanted to thank you," Spock said softly. "You saved my life." Cha twisted away awkwardly, not letting Spock see his face. When he spoke, his voice was gruff, full of feeling. "Friends do that." "Yes," Spock said, considering. "I suppose they do." For some minutes, the two sat together without speaking. Then Cha cleared his throat. "I will celebrate my birthday on the way back home, Spock. As soon as we arrive at Shakir, my father and my uncles will join me to perform the ceremony of bonding. Then I will be a man." He glanced at Spock. "Everything in my life will change from then on. No more childish disobedience. No more sharing secrets with alien friends." "That will be a loss," Spock said. "But in accepting adulthood, you will gain much as well." "I hope to be a leader of my people in time," Cha said. "You Vulcans have much to teach Marithans. We are a violent and illogical people. Perhaps we can learn from you to control our hurtful emotions, to get along with each other. I wish I could help all Marithans learn that lesson." With a grin, Cha said, "It would be wonderful if I became the chief counselor of the Marithans and you the ambassador from Vulcan." This time Spock looked away. "Only time will show if that is possible." "Thank you, Spock. On the contrary, thank you, Cha." Weeks passed. Cha and his family, Sarek and his aides, left Vulcan for Marith. Before long, Sarek called home to tell Amanda and Spock that the treaty had been successfully amended. "Working out the language was very difficult because we had to refer to things that cannot be named, but somehow we have succeeded. Now all sides can at last agree," Sarek said, "and Marith will become leader of the Federation." "And Vulcan?" Spock asked. "Has the crisis passed here too?" Sarek nodded. "An acute question. Things have changed because this problem has been successfully resolved despite the warnings of those who fear outsiders. The power of the opposition party has waned. Vulcan will not close itself off from other worlds. More logical minds have prevailed." "That is good." "I think so. I must prepare for the return voyage now. Amanda and Spock, live long and prosper." Spock raised his hand in the ancient Vulcan gesture of greeting and farewell. "Live long and prosper, Father." When the screen faded away, Spock stared into the distance for a long time, not really seeing anything. More weeks passed. Sarek returned home. He spoke to his son of the coming year, when Spock would enter the Science Academy as a full-time student. Spock listened gravely, nodded, and kept his trouble to himself. After a morning spent reviewing the subtle language of the successful Marathon Treaty, Sarek looked at Spock for a long time before saying, "You will make a fine diplomat one day, Spock. Study your science if you must, but realize that you have a higher calling. It is an infinitely varied galaxy with much trouble in it. You can help to end hostility, to make the universe a more rational place, as I have done." Spock hoped that his face did not show the turmoil in his heart. On a warm afternoon, not long after, he found Amanda working in her garden. The sun was low, and the heat of the afternoon was pleasant in his bones. He helped his mother with an exotic earth plant, and she spoke of it as they watered and pruned. "It's called a century plant," she said. "Why is that?" asked Spock. "There's a legend that it blooms only once every 100 Earth years." Amanda took a step back. "Well, it seems to be adapting nicely to Vulcan conditions." "Does it?" Amanda glanced at him. "Does it bloom only once a century?" "No, actually it doesn't. It's more like once every 20 years or so." "An illogical name," Spock observed. Amanda laughed. "Well, we humans are an illogical species." Spock looked around the garden. "This is a very harmonious place," he said. "You have planted species from 49 different worlds. It ought to be a jumble of competing forms and shapes, but it is not. There is a sense here of—" his voice trailed off. "Of completeness," he finished at last. "Thank you, Spock." "I'm reminded of the Enterprise." Amanda laughed again. "The connection escapes me." On the horizon the sun sank. Soon the chill of night would come, the thin air releasing the heat of the day. Spock looked up. High in the darkening sky, wispy ice clouds caught the rays of the vanishing sun and glowed a brilliant scarlet. Beyond them was darkness of space. Slowly, Spock said, "The Enterprise crew was not made up exclusively of humans. There were Centaurians, at least one Andorian, and a Betazoid as well, and one of the crew's parents were a Deltan and a human." "Oh," Amanda said, "I see. There were many alien species all planted in one garden. Is that it?" "Not planted, for they are all sentient," Spock said. "The Vulcan Science Academy, by contrast, is a garden filled with virulence." "Weeds?" Amanda shook her head. "Now you've lost me." "A virulent is not a weed," Spock said. "It is a Vulcan plant." "I know, Spock," Amanda replied. "It branches roots far and wide, and wherever they approach the surface, they send up shoots that become clones identical to the parent plant. But to tell you the truth, virulents are not particularly lovely specimens. They are adapted for harsh conditions, but they crowd out other plants." "And so do the students at the Science Academy." Amanda led him to the sheltered seat. "This is a more serious conversation than I thought," she said. "Tell me everything, Spock." For the better part of an hour, Spock told her the whole story. He spoke of how he had felt like an outsider at the Science Academy, but as if he belonged aboard the Enterprise. He told of Christopher Pike's surprising offer, of the fascination it held for him to be the first Vulcan officer in Starfleet. That was an intriguing goal. "And it is logical," Spock said slowly. "Father has struggled to forge closer ties between Vulcan and the Federation. To have Vulcans in Starfleet can only help both Starfleet and ourselves." "If you feel strongly about Starfleet," Amanda said, "you must accept the offer." "Feelings are illogical, Mother." "Not always, Spock." With a sigh, Spock looked up. It was night now, and stars glittered overhead. "Father has planned my whole future for me," he said, "and he does not think highly of humans." "With at least one exception, I hope," Spock said. "I regret my—" "Oh, hush, Spock, I'm joking." "Yes," Spock sighed. "Father will not be pleased," he said at last. After a long silence, Amanda said, "In an ancient Earth play, a character says, 'This above all, to thine own self be true.' He wasn't a very bright character, but that was a good piece of advice. And another work of literature from Earth, a poem, talks of choosing a path less traveled. It may create problems, but could you honestly take the path your father has made and not feel regret?" "No," Spock said. "I would try to suppress the emotion, of course, but I would feel regret." "When must you decide?" "I have already decided," confessed Spock. "I will accept the appointment to Starfleet Academy. I must give my answer to Starfleet soon." "I'll tell your father if you wish." "No," Spock said. "That is my task." He looked up again. The stars, brilliant and fierce in the thin air of Vulcan, beckoned from the depths of space. The motto of Starfleet Academy is also from an old Earth tongue, he said. Ex astris scientia. That's Latin, Amanda said. From the stars, knowledge. In the darkness, she touched his arm. But I know a better motto for you, Spock. Ad astra. Yes, murmured Spock. To the stars. To the stars.